Joining us now, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Todd Dupree. Jake and Paul still with us. Paul, what should we make of the fact that we were reassured by Todd Blanche that this was dead, and then now it seems it could be resurrected?
You cannot believe anything this government says. And you can't believe anything that Trump says. And the bottom line is he has always been focused on providing payouts. It's not compensation. It's straight up payouts for domestic terrorists and insurrectionists who tried to overthrow the government. And this is, again, part of that larger strategy, in my view, to give a green light to people to stand with him against opposition, to stand with him ahead of the midterms and ahead of future fights. I've called it Plan C. Plan A could be sending in the National Guard, the military. Plan B could be sending in ICE. Plan C would be saying, hey, everybody, the election's a fraud, go attack it. And this provides financial incentive for people who tried to overthrow our government. It's treasonous, it's unacceptable, and we've got to hold them at the word, but also really dig deeper and not listen to what they're saying.
So, Tom, there are already legal challenges to this fund. Is it possible for the DOJ to try to reinstate it? And how likely are the challenges that it's facing at this point to sink it?
Well, one thing we know is that President Trump very much likes the idea of the fund. He is wedded to the idea of getting compensation to people that he thinks are deserving of it. I think the fund is a terrible idea. I hope it goes away. But I suspect what we're going to see is some creative, shall we say, efforts by the Justice Department and the White House to get this payouts happening. I think they are going to come up with a structure that is not the fund as it is currently constituted. So it would not be the fund that is, as you said, the subject of these different legal challenges. But they would try to come up with some formulation, some construction that would allow these payments to be made and fulfill what at least the president views as a just outcome here of getting compensation to these individuals.
Jake, did lawmakers think that they had put this all behind them? What's the reaction on Capitol Hill that this could come back to life?
Yeah, I mean, they did. They had Blanche in committee saying it wasn't going to happen. They had assurances from the White House it wasn't going to happen. And they voted down several amendments to make sure it didn't happen. So they obviously weren't that concerned, considering that they had the opportunity to make it so that this would never come back. And they voted against it. If the administration does this in any way, shape or form, it will be a huge middle finger to Capitol Hill. I mean, that's just what it will be. And there will be, I would imagine, there will be legislative repercussions for something like that.
I have heard that across the board about this exact move. That has been the figure of speech that everyone has been using when talking about it. Sorry about that. Dad's calling. It never waits. Jake, legislatively, what moves can Congress take to kill this? Do they have options at this point?
For sure, yeah. They have lots of options. They could explicitly prohibit it in statute. They could make sure that I'm one of the people on this panel who is not a lawyer, but I think they could also use the appropriations process to explicitly prohibit any money from going to this. There are ways. I mean, again, Congress writes the laws. The president theoretically executes them. So there are lots of ways they could do that. They chose not to. They have other opportunities to do that, should they want to, in the next, 6 to 8 months.
Tom, if we can't take the DOJ at its word, we had Todd Blanche say what he said, and now seemingly backpedaling. What would it take to stop the DOJ from enacting this again?
Well, I think it's Congress. I think Congress would have to act. Congress, as Jake correctly noted, does have the power of the purse. So it could place restrictions on the way that the Justice Department could use the judgment fund. It could enact broader prohibitions on people who participated or were convicted of January 6 related offenses from receiving any sort of federal payment. I think Congress actually has a fairly broad range of options at its disposal. I think the only question is whether or not they have the political will to exercise them, whether or not they are sufficiently upset by the possibility that the White House might try to get money to these people in some way, shape, or form, that they are prompted to actually legislate a prohibition on it and prevent the White House and the Justice Department from getting money to people who I think most Americans think are far from deserving of it.
Yesterday, Tom, a U.S. District Judge Richard Leon refused to block the fund, ending the hearing with a fair warning, writing, "Don't play possum with this court." How might general distrust at this point impact the cases challenging the fund?
Well, I think it goes to your earlier point in that, for better or for worse, in my view, for worse, I think many federal judges are now beginning to distrust, things that Justice Department lawyers are telling them in court. This is not the way it has always been. Historically, Justice Department lawyers, including myself, have the benefit of having a presumption that they are telling the truth, they are operating in good faith, and they're looking out for the best interests of the United States. I think we are increasingly seeing many federal judges of all stripes, conservative judges, liberal judges, starting to question, in a way they never have before, what Justice Department lawyers are saying to them in their courtrooms. So the answer to your question is yes. I do think this increased level of distrust will inform how federal judges approach any further questions about the fund or efforts to get money to people who are convicted in relation to January 6th.
In a separate challenge, Tom, in Virginia, the judge says that she will consider the amicus brief from Senators Cory Booker and Bill Cassidy. How significant is that?
I think that's significant, too. Look, I think a lot of these judges are operating in somewhat of uncharted territory. They are not used to having situations where they have to kind of take what the Justice Department lawyers are telling them with a grain of salt. And when federal judges are unsure of what to do, they often will look to outside counsel from so-called amici, friends of the court, who just say, look, we want to contribute our views. We think the court needs to take a different perspective. We want to help the court understand our perspective. And so when we're in that universe, I do think we will see federal judges listening to voices that they may not previously have listened to, particularly when, as here, the voices are bipartisan. And you have both Republicans and Democrats aligning to tell the court their particular message.